Lars Nootbaar was placed on the 10-day injured list just before this weekend with an oblique strain. And it was something that bothered him a little bit earlier in the week against Cincinnati. They finally decided, you know what, let's make sure that gets taken care of before you injure that even further. So with Nootbaar now on the injured list, and the outfield obviously has had some injuries to it this year for the Cardinals, what do you maybe see with that group, and especially with Nootbaar, considering that he was an important piece of them having this kind of resurgence over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, exactly. It's very basic to say, hey, when they're healthy, they're good. But that's really what it is. It comes down to having the players first out there playing, and second, playing up to their capability. They've had a number of players that have just been down, whether that's players go through slumps, start of the season, who knows what's going on behind the scenes. But you certainly don't expect a Nolan Arenado to go through a full season of this, but it's possible. Paul Goldschmidt has been too good a hitter his entire career to be like this. Nootbaar's not had this many health problems and has always hit. So he just hasn't made that step forward that I think so many of us kind of set in stone, especially last year. After such a breakout World Baseball Classic, he very literally stood out on that team that was filled with stars, filled with MVPs and very, very rich guys. So, the fact that he just hasn't been able to become that third star they thought they needed, or really the first star for the future, they just haven't been able to translate a lot of that talent. I think the success of Mason Wynn is certainly something, but you take a look at the rest of the team, and this is still that collection of pieces and parts that we've seen for the last couple seasons.
And Will, we'll have to get into a little bit on the Cardinals pitching staff with you too here in a moment, but I wanted to ask you about just generally, you mentioned Mason Wynn, and he was a little bit maybe iffy yesterday with the back, and he dealt with the back in spring. Nolan Gorman with the Cardinals has had back. Arenado. Is there anything to that, and how do you manage it with so many guys kind of dealing with maybe not serious back issues, but issues with the back that seem to be kind of all across the Cardinals infield? And if Mason Wynn should have to miss time at some point, Brandon Crawford would be the answer. So the Cardinals may not be super comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's a step down. No offense to Crawford. He's just not the guy he used to be. This is a situation, and what you have to key in here is it's not just back. You worry about structural back issues. If you've just got back spasms or a back strain, that's certainly not good, certainly painful if you've ever had them, but they're transient. You take a look, you add in guys, think about all the guys who've had obliques, think about all the guys who have had groins, think about all the guys who have hamstrings. And it comes down to really, that dirty word of load management. These guys, we don't think about the pitch clock and the hitters, but they're having to move faster too. They don't get a chance to take a break. They've had to break rituals in some cases. You think about all those guys who had to, change their batting gloves and do a little dance and write something in the dirt, all those things. You can't do that anymore. It's the same in the fields. You don't get that same gap. You don't get as long in between innings. So what we're seeing is players that are just tiring out, and we're seeing that across the league. Tons of oblique injuries, tons of lower back injuries, tons of hamstring and hip injuries. So it's one of those things where it's not just the pitchers. It's a lot with the pitchers, but it's not just the pitchers that are getting hurt by the pitch clock.
It's real interesting. Will Carroll, the injury expert here on the Big Show, KTGR and KTGR.com. And with the Cardinals' pitching issues that they've had, some of it is injury related. They've expected to have more relievers available to them this season, but one of them that hasn't pitched all year for him, Keynan Middleton, might not pitch all year for the rest of the season because he's getting a second opinion, it looks like, on his forearm strain. The fear is Tommy John, of course, but what's Middleton's situation in your eyes looking like, Will, is the Cardinals really wanted to try and use a leverage reliever like him this year?
Yeah, it's too bad, but these guys, too many times, we remember the greats, we remember the Riveras, the Hoffmans. There just aren't very many relievers that last that long. These are the sprinters. They go out there, they go throw as hard as they can. There's a reason they're relievers. They usually have one good pitch or they're super high velocity, but they don't, it's not just they don't get, a lot of them get hurt. Some of them don't, and they just fade away. their effectiveness fades. They lose a half mile an hour. They lose a little bit of movement. For Middleton, the worry is more flexor, which is just as bad. It would take him out for the year. If the UCL is involved, certainly that would take him out even longer. So it's bad, but we've seen the Cardinals have a number of injuries, but we're also seeing across the league kind of a new way that teams are managing these bullpens. We're seeing a lot of rotation. There's 26 guys, and usually 13 or 14 of them are pitchers. Now, you think about whether, certainly you're not going to use your starter. So there's 5 guys off the top. So you still have 8 or 9 guys who should be available. And yet teams are largely saying this is not enough, rotating them through. Either they use the DL for the slightest injuries, not fake injuries, but really slight ones that they could probably pitch through. But they realize that, if you lose even 1 or 2% at this level, you're probably not as good as the guy who's, at Memphis and 100%. We've seen them resting guys ahead of moves, which tells us this is kind of planned. So it's one of those things, not the Cardinals. There have been other teams that have done that. I haven't actually checked on the Cardinals. But the Cardinals are one of the teams that is essentially rotating relievers. Now, certainly you'd rather have all your key guys healthy. That's just not going to happen. But this rotation that functionally gives people a 30-man roster and a 15-man pen is just kind of crazy, and I think we've got to do something about it.
And one more pitching thought on the Cardinals, Will. It'll be Andre Pallante pitching tonight against the Astros. He's kind of slid into that Steven Matz spot now in the rotation, but it's maybe possible that Matz could be ramping back up again soon. What do you know about his situation for the lefty starter?
Yeah, he's been throwing. He's ready for a rehab. They haven't set that as far as I know, or at least it's not known publicly. That'll probably happen, I would say, late this week into the weekend. And I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know if it's 1 or 2, but it shouldn't be one of those, 30-day rehab assignments. And getting him back out there should help. Though, again, this is one of the things you have to do in a season, is I don't think there's going to be anybody that argues Pallante is as good or better than Steven Matz. Could he be a good starter? Yeah. But could he be a good starter for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Yes, absolutely. In a small sample size, anything can happen, and you need it to happen. You need those guys to step up and outperform themselves a little bit in those situations to be a winning ball club.
Will Carroll, the injury expert here on the Big Show, KTGR and KTGR.com. On the Royals side, they're going to be without one of their starters for a little bit. Michael Wacha took a comebacker off the foot and described as a small non-displaced or non-displaced fracture, it looks like, for him, but he's still on the IL and is going to need some time to recover from that. What do you know about Wacha's situation with him being a pretty important part of a Royals rotation that has impressed so far?
Yeah, you don't want this to happen. There had been some question about Bobic, whether he was going to be stuck at AAA when he was finished with his rehab, and he's running out of time on that 30-day rehab clock. But now with Wacha, that's certainly going to be the fit. Haven't seen him make an official move on that. But Wacha's just, we've seen this over the last 2 years, that we're seeing more and more pitchers get hit. And Saris did some great work, looked to see if more balls were just being hit at pitchers. That would be the easy solution. That's not the case. They're just getting hit harder at pitchers, and that means they don't have as much time to get out of the way. So if they get hit in the foot, that's almost a victory. At first, it was a ground ball, which is what they're looking for. Second, they're not getting hit in the head or the chest, and that can be life-threatening. So, it hit him right above the arch. It was extremely painful, I'm told, but it's a broken foot. So it's going to take... The interesting thing here is they think because of where it broke, it doesn't have to be fully healed for him to get back out there. So it could be as little as a month, though I'd say it's probably going to be closer to 6 weeks, especially depending on how the rotation fills in behind him.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see how the Royals deal with that. They called up Daniel Lynch, who had been making some spot starts so far this year. So we'll see how long he has to fill that fifth starter role for the Royals. NBA Finals starts this week. Both teams got a week essentially to rest. But, Will, it seems that both the Mavericks and Celtics, in your eyes, are teams that have really figured out how to make sure that their players maybe aren't as overused for these times of years, which is always the most important time. What do you kind of view this matchup as between the Celtics and Mavericks, maybe from the injury side of things as they get ready to face each other?
These are healthy teams, and that's what you need at this time of year. I think when you take a look at the playoffs, 3 of the 4 teams that made it to the conference finals were very big investors in sports science. The Celtics have been in the lead on this, 20 years now. Ever since Whit Grousbeck bought the team, he's been focused on that. You can see him every year at Sloan taking notes. I mean, how often do you see an owner at a sports science conference? Sloan is the big conference at MIT every year there in Boston. He's been a speaker. I think he's a supporter of it. But that team has spent more on that. And that's why you see their injuries. And that's why you see them doing a lot of things, how they're managing their rotations. They've got coaches right there on the bench telling them exactly what they need to do. In practice, they've watched heart rates. They know muscle lactate. They know tons of information that allows them to do that. The Pacers have been catching up. The Mavericks made a big investment this year after Mark Cuban sold. The Adelsons have been throwing money at this and trying to catch up. Cuban, for all the thought he likes to be on the cutting edge, he's more inclined to give the players, big screen TVs in their locker than do something that might actually make a difference on the court. He might buy them a new basketball that tracks the shot rather than getting them something that will keep them on the court. Same thing for the we've seen that with the Nuggets. They've had availability, and we're certainly seeing that the teams basically the Pacers got through to the playoffs because Giannis Antetokounmpo was hurt, Damian Lillard was hurt. The Knicks were all banged up and playing hurt. They were down to one starter at one point. So this really matters. And the fact that they blew through the finals and got the week's rest helps. But I don't think that's the real story. I think the real story is how the sports science staffs behind the scenes have been using the data and have kept these teams as healthy as possible to put them in this position to win a ring.
Yeah, it's a grueling stretch, the NBA playoffs, and the teams that can weather that the best certainly do deserve to play at the end, and the Mavericks and Celtics have done exactly that. Will, what's new at Under the Knife?
Taking a look around the league at all the injuries, and on Monday, I covered 31 pitching injuries. 31! And I didn't even cover them all. But, if you want to take a look at what this is doing, jump in undertheknife.substack.com. It's just $5 a month.
Yeah, a lot of pitching injuries to talk about for sure, so you can get all the insight on that with Will Carroll's newsletter. Again, undertheknife.substack.com. You can find that link in his Twitter page as well, @InjuryExpert on Twitter. Great to have Will Carroll here on the Big Show, KTGR. Thanks, Will, for coming on as always. Hope you're well. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, boys.